So to begin, I am not here to sell you on 5 dimensions. I'm not here to promote it. It was a process that we went through early last spring into the summer around adopting an instructional framework for the district. I'm going to get a little bit into today around the instructional framework and then the rubric that is attached and aligned to that that's reflective for the teacher, or reflected in the teacher evaluation process. So I will get into that in a second. If you have questions, I'll get it. If you have questions, please, I know there's probably elephants in the room, there's probably questions about details that you need. Please use the sticky notes, jot them down, and stick them on the parking lot, because 60 minutes doesn't provide a ton of time for us to have dialogue back and forth, which I understand could be very needed and could be beneficial. The reality is 60 minutes is tough that way. So please jot your questions down. I will follow up with each and every one of them and make sure they're answered. Okay? So to begin, just with some norms, if you could come into this with presuming some positive intentions, I would appreciate that. And I'm not trying to talk down to you when I say that. I just mean this work is not intended to make your life harder, or it's not intended to do bad things to our kids. It really is out of the purest intent to have a framework for the district, in a big district, 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a high school, and 400 teachers, to have some common language and understandings around what we consider high quality instruction. So that's the intent, and I fully want you to engage in, I don't understand this, or I don't agree with that. I want that to be this environment. Pose questions, I already mentioned that. Ask your questions, put them in the parking lot, or maybe there's an opportunity to answer some questions face to face. If you could pay attention to yourself and others, just that being the intent of listen before we're quick to respond. I always have to check myself on that. I'm like waiting for the next thing I'm going to say something. If you could just make sure we're checking with each other and listening to one another, that would be appreciated. I have up here experienced discomfort, and I mean that, and also the non-closure. 60 minutes to unload and unpack this work after 3 days of training around this work is a difficult proposition. And so you're going to leave here with questions. You're going to leave here with some non-closure around some things. I'm just telling you that principals and the leadership teams back at the building level who went through the training are there to follow up on all of this, and that we have some intentional things planned to make sure that that's followed up on. Okay? Also, just to remind you, this is such an engaging session. We are taping this, so if you needed to refer back to anything, it will be up, and that's a joke. But if you wanted to refer back to anything, feel free to do that. But I do think there's a little bit of he said, she said with some of these things, so I did just want to make sure it's captured. Somehow I didn't get my PowerPoint onto the website, the PD website, so I'll make sure and do that as well. Okay, so the learning targets for the day. I want you to walk away with an understanding around these 3 things, and if you don't, I didn't do a very good job. So again, 60 minutes is a challenge, but I do want you to be able to walk away with why are we doing this. So just to be able to understand the why. You may not agree with the why, but you could explain the why. Understand how the strategic plan that was put in place last year connects to this framework as well as the teacher evaluation process. Will be important to be able to articulate that. And then the last thing is just to have an initial understanding of some of the changes with the teacher evaluation process that we'll start to see this year. I'd like to be able to say I could get through every detail. I won't be able to do that. Principals will do that. But to at least have an understanding of some of the shifts that will be made this year. So the agenda is this. Sharing this agenda isn't as important as just the intent with this is some of the language that I think you'll start to see in the district that we need to have some common understanding around, you'll find in this agenda. And I just wanted to kind of be explicit about showing that to you. So for instance, one of the things that you could see underneath the framing the why, what would a success criteria be? So you will see the language success criteria in the framework as well as in the rubric. And that's really getting at what would we expect our learners, you today, our students in the classroom, to be able to know and be able to do with the information that's being provided. So that's again, just a language piece of this work. Okay, so the why. Before I get into kind of some substantive things, I wanted to share just a quick video with you of two of our staff members, Kate Rossiter and Jamie Klossing, who I think you all know. If you don't, Kate is an instructional coach this year. She was an elementary teacher at Hutchings for previous many years. And Jamie Klossing is a teacher at Highlander Way Middle School, science teacher. I asked them to just answer a prompt, which the prompt was, what does professional growth mean to you? And I'm just going to play that conversation that they had around, again, what does professional growth mean? So give me a second to cue that up.
So Kate, we're ready to start a new school year, 2016, 2017, and there's lots of changes this year. Mm-hmm. So as you reflect on your growth and practice as an educator, what are some of your takeaways? What are some things that you think will help get you through this next year?
It's a little scary this year. There are a lot of changes, and so it kind of is like you get the nervous feeling in your stomach. But I think the thing is, with change, it's like an opportunity to truly grow yourself, grow your district, grow whatever your goal is for. And sometimes having the change, it might be the jump start to get you where you need to be.
So growth for you then is an opportunity. Mm-hmm. An opportunity that you kind of take a hold of depending on where you are as a person in your profession or within your community. Mm-hmm. I think the collaboration piece is essential because even through our conversations, we're able to brainstorm. We're able to refine our plans. Mm-hmm. We're able to think, take somebody else's perspective and really see how we can make it better for all.
So it should be exciting instead of scary.
I think so. Empowering, right?
That's right, empowering.
And if we think about our mission statement for our teachers, it's really empowering them through their professional growth. So how do we help them along the way? How do we provide opportunities for them so that they feel like they can take ownership of their learning as well as, feel empowered to make change and to be agents of change?
Okay, so kudos to the two of them for letting me twist their arm to do that. But I just wanted to frame up before we jump right into the why, that this is the intent of this is really to start to shift our mindset around this being a growth process, and that growth process is not a summative situation where we say we've arrived and we're done. It's a commitment to always improving, and that's I think we're all committed to that, but sometimes when we put it into practice, we need to remind ourselves of that. So with regards to the why and getting into some of the substance, I just wanted to take you back to the strategic plan that was put in place last year. We had a group of about 70 individuals get together. It was parents, it was community members, it was teachers, principals, and our board who engaged in a process that, on a big picture, what do we do really well? What are we needing to improve on? And then how do we put some actions in place to address those things? Along with that work, we began with coming up with some belief statements for our district. And I just wanted to take a moment for us to look at these belief statements. If you're in the way back, you may need to move up and take a look. But what I'd like you to do is, if you have just a piece of paper, if you have an electronic device, whatever you're comfortable with, if you could read these belief statements, I'll actually read them for you in a second. And just jot down 2 or 3 key words that speak to you when it comes to your professional practice. 2 or 3 key words that speak to you when it comes to your professional practice. First statement, all students can learn. Second statement, all students learn best in a safe, secure, and engaging environment. The responsibility for student success is shared among parents, students, staff, and community. Encouraging and promoting growth and innovation empowers students to be successful citizens. All students have dignity, value, and voice. Building relationships between staff and students promotes continuous improvement for all. And then lastly, strong financial stewardship and transparency demonstrates trust with our Howell Public Schools community. 2 or 3 key words that speak to you when it comes to your professional practice. When you have those, if you have an elbow partner that's close by, I'd like you to just share those with and why you chose those 2 or 3.
Learn, value, relationship. It's for kids and staff. Yeah, those would be my empowering students. Yeah.
I think that's why I went with writing. I think that's why I went with teams. I feel like teams
So the ultimate goal is, continuous, encouraging continuous improvement.
Okay, if you could wrap up your conversation. Some things we're going to be able to come back and have kind of an all group conversation. Some things I'm just going to leave to the kind of partner tabletop conversation. I think you will see alignment between some of these belief statements and when we get into some of the values and the vision of the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning. The challenge for us is, what does this start to look like in the classroom? And I think that's obviously the question that you should have is, okay, fine, these are big, broad belief statements, but what does it look like when it comes to the classroom? But just trying to set the foundation for some things. So this is a graphic, and I will hand this out in a minute, of the instructional framework. And I'm going to try to be really clear and explicit around, there's an instructional framework with 5 dimensions, and there's a rubric. And I'm going to probably repeat myself a few times on that, but that's just to make sure that we're clear around what we're trying to do with the framework about having a common vision and a common understanding and a common language that's research-based. The Center for Educational Leadership is out of Washington. Again, feel free to get on their website. They have a lot of research that goes into, if you do these things in the classroom at a high level, you're going to increase student achievement. So that's the intent of this framework. Actually, what I want you to do just for a second, if you could just think individually around a lesson, could have been last year, could have been in the last 5 years, could have been 10 years, that you felt like you just hit it out of the park. You were driving home that day and you're like, that was awesome. That was not how I was feeling on session 1 of this. But seriously, like, we've had those. I certainly, when I was teaching, had some of those, and I also had some that are like, holy cow, like, what happened? But think back just individually right now and think back to that lesson that you're like, that was awesome. And I just want you to think about, why was it awesome? So what was it? And then why was it an incredible lesson for you? What were you doing? What were the kids doing? And just think about that for a second individually. But the why piece is what I want you thinking about. I know I'm kind of moving us forward quickly. Take a minute to share that with your elbow partner. Again, what was the lesson and why did you go home like, that was awesome?
And how much they could do independently.
Okay, wrap up your conversation, please. Okay, anybody willing to take a risk for the group and share what were some of those things as to why it was such a successful lesson? What were some of those key descriptors that came out of that? Not all at once. I'm sorry? All students were engaged. Thank you. They're having fun. All right. They were empowered.
They were successful.
They were successful.
They were able to disagree with each other.
They were able to
Disagree with each other.
They were able to disagree with one another, so there was some peer-to-peer engagement, disagreement. Elementary group, you guys are so good at participating. Thank you. So you guys hit on some things. The only reason I just had you do that was that we know what good instruction is in this classroom and in this district. I know that. But I also think there's a real benefit of saying, like, okay, student engagement, peer-to-peer dialogue, those kinds of things need a framework and need some further dialogue around, like, okay, we can throw out student engagement, but what does that really look like? Again, we know it, but let's have a framework that we can come back to and that we can anchor those conversations in. So that's another intent of trying to get at some of those things. Thank you for participating. Another piece of this, just graphically, helps me kind of look at some things. This is not a flavor of the month. This is, 5D for October, and then we're going to move on. I'm committed to having a framework and a plan that we can have a lens through which we know what high-quality instruction is, and we can start to plan PD intentionally around your needs around that framework. So you're going to see today, for example, there's some glitches, there's some things that didn't go perfectly. But the Instructional Services Department would try to be really intentional around the sessions that were offered, aligning to the 5D rubric. Now, it's too early for you to make some of those connections because we haven't exposed you to the 5D framework. But we will continue to be very intentional around what we're providing and what we're doing and how that connects to the framework. Make sense? And then, of course, that foundation being laid, that then leads to all of the great work that's going on in the buildings and in the classrooms. And that's where the magic happens, and that's where the work is done. Okay, one last piece, and I certainly didn't want to lead with this, but I also just want to make sure it's out on the table because it's a reality. There is a legal piece of this. There's a compliance piece to this work. When the state made a shift with teacher evaluation, there were some things that they put in place. Most recently, they said you could choose, the pointer's not working great, between these 4 instructional teacher evaluation rubrics to use in a district. And that was the compliance piece. You had to do this. If you don't do it, you had to provide a whole bunch of documentation about why what you're using is research-based and all those things. So we had a committee put in place last year that took a look at these 4. If you can't read that, Danielson, Marzano, the Thoughtful Classroom, and 5 Dimensions are the 4 that the state says, yep, that went through a vetting process, those will work. Again, I'm not here to sell 5D and we're all going to march out of here like 5D is the best thing ever. I get that, but I will say the committee came back unanimously with 5D. There's a lot of similarities with these 4 as far as what's good instruction. I think 5D, the more I get into it, it's very clear and explicit about what those things are, and I think it provides a very clear target for those things. So that committee put that process in place, came back and said, yep, this is the one that would work best for the district. So again, that's just a kind of legal end of this. Okay, the foundational ideas. I think some of you might have dug into these a little bit in your staff meetings, so some of this might be redundant, but that's okay because we'll scaffold and that'll be fine. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time with the foundational ideas of the Center for Educational Learning, which is CEL. So we like to throw a lot of acronyms at you. This is one more. And if you don't understand these foundational ideas, it's very difficult to start to dig into the framework. And again, that's not to sound patronizing. I had to spend time with the team that went through the training to really dig into these things. So I'm going to ask for you, again, just individually, I'll come back to this. Read through those foundational ideas. I'll put them back on the screen. Record 3 or more if you want, kind of keywords or phrases out of those foundational ideas. Again, going back to the idea with the belief statements, why do they connect to your professional work? And then again, when you're done doing that, if you could share those with your elbow partner. So there's the foundational ideas. Take a look at those. And it might be something that doesn't make sense too. Maybe something you need to underline that doesn't quite make sense. But what would you underline that speaks to your professional practice or that you just have some questions about? Yeah, that was so loud. Sorry. Okay, so go ahead and share those keywords or phrases with your elbow partner. You guys' shirts are awesome, by the way. I didn't say that, yeah.
Only the negative was that you could have done this. It wasn't you could have, you should have.
Oh, no, I'm good. I thought you meant a beer. That I need. No, I have one, thank you. Okay, if you could wrap up your conversation, please. Okay, thank you. So again, I feel like I'm hesitating that I'm going to talk at you a little bit through these. I wanted to provide an opportunity that you could engage with your colleagues around some of those foundational ideas. I just wanted to take you through and kind of give you a perspective. And yeah, I guess it's from my perspective about digging into some of these things, some of these foundational ideas, but trying to understand them in the context of framing up the instructional framework for the district. So the first one, if students are not learning, they are not being afforded powerful learning opportunities. So, question, what is the single greatest factor that's going to increase student achievement?
The teacher.
The teacher. High quality instruction from a teacher. And there's research that supports that. John Hattie is one of my favorites. Sell has some tremendous research behind that. But the single greatest factor that's going to increase student achievement is a high quality instruction in the teacher in the classroom. We can spend time, and I'm going to put some of my bias out there right now, we can spend time talking about poverty and single parent families and factors that we have no control over, quite honestly. We wish they were better, but we don't have any control over them. And do they impact learning sometimes? They do. But the greatest factor that we do have control over is the teacher in the classroom. And so that's what we need to put our focus into, not the things that we really don't have any control over. My soapbox, I'll get off. But that's just how I feel about some things. And I think this is a pretty explicit statement around those. Excuse me. Teaching is highly complex and sophisticated endeavor. One of the facilitators that took us through some training mentioned that teaching on a day-to-day basis rivals the decision-making a teacher makes rivals that of a brain surgeon. And I don't say that lightly. I actually think that's quite serious. Because the decisions you make each and every day, split second, by the minute, it's why you're exhausted at the end of the day. It's why you go home and you're like, especially that first week. There's a science behind teaching, and then there's the art. And the art is like, hey, a kid just asked an awesome question, I'm going to take it and run with it. And so those are the kind of split-second decisions that you all are doing every day. And so that's why, that's not an easy thing to say, yeah, we're going to put a grade on that. So just being real with that, I get that. That's a real concern, is like, you don't know every decision I'm making on a day-to-day basis. And yet I know those things are going on, and we know those things are going on. Practice of sophisticated endeavors only improves when it is open for analysis and critique. So, again, pretty straightforward statements. I think we can learn a lot as a profession, to be quite honest, taking a look at some other professions. My wife, for example, I'm going to do some kudos with her right now. She's an attorney. She's a prosecutor in Oakland County. She deals with some really high-level cases. She has trials anywhere from child abuse stuff to just life-changing things that she's going into court on. Oftentimes, she'll go into court and try a case, and there's 4 other attorneys, her colleagues, that are there watching her, that are there saying, after she's done, saying, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Did you think about this? But the culture there is, it's not a personal attack. It's just a question. And so I'm not trying to talk down at you right now. I'm just saying I think we as a profession can look at some other professions that asking a question about practice is not a personal attack. From peer to peer or principal to teacher. And I really think we need to challenge ourselves to say, it's okay to ask some questions, like how are you doing that? Or why did you approach it this way? Or why did you do the learning target that way? Or whatever the questions might be, it's not personal. Trying to shift the culture, it's not personal. Improving practice in a culture of analysis and critique requires reciprocal accountability. Anybody get hung up with this? That's why he wrote it down. So yeah, reciprocal accountability, what does that mean to all of us? It can mean, different things. I heard different conversations going on. To me, with this process with 5D is that I'm accountable, the principal's accountable, you're accountable, the student's accountable. And so in this process, it's not you, it's not me, it's not any one person. We're all in this together, and we're accountable to one another to hold each other to that high level. These last two, with regards to leadership, are important. So with that reciprocal accountability, that's on us as leaders to take a different approach when it comes to leadership. We're not talking down at you. We're not, telling you after we leave your classroom, you should have been doing this. We might pose questions, just like I would hope a peer would pose a question. But that does take a different type of leadership that maybe we've been used to. Leaders cannot lead what they don't know. So huge point here, and I'm just going to share with you, you're only going to be able to see this if it comes to fruition. But I did want to share with you, with the 5D framework that we've adopted, there's been 3 days of, in my opinion, very intense training around this work. 8-hour sessions with MASSP facilitators who have done a really good job with not only our principals and our assistant principals, but also a leadership team at the teacher level. So every building has representation at those meetings or at those trainings, and I think it's a really powerful team. That's why the challenge with this right now is to sum up 60 minutes to sum up 3 days of training is difficult. So, but just know that we're committed to that. That's been the first 3 days. There'll be 3 more days before November that team engages in. Okay, so those are the foundational ideas. The mission of the Center for Educational Leadership is this. So just to give you a little further kind of perspective as to what values they have, And it's all about equity. And I just wanted to take a moment to share with you kind of the difference between equity, again, my opinion, and equality, because I think we spend some time talking about equality and equity as though they're synonymous. And so I think this picture does a nice job. If you're in the back and this is hard to see, these are 3 kids trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. The left-hand side is equality, which would mean that each one of those kids has the same box to try to see over and see the game. And this, you can take this analogy in a lot of different directions as far as being able to access to the game, access to life. And then the right-hand side is this piece on equity. And so we may need to have some hard conversations around, again, in my opinion, we need to be focused on equity. There are some kids in our district that need additional support, an additional box to step on because they need to see the game. They need access to life. And that's not easy. I get that is not an easy thing to do. But that's the difference, in my opinion, with equity and equality. We need to focus our conversation to the equity piece. Okay. So I'm going to actually ask the principals real quick. Can you guys help me out, pass out the framework? I should have asked you guys before. Sorry. Thank you.
Your mom?
Jenny, you can ask for some help there.
You're killing me.
So we'll take each of the levels, and they're going to pass out, thank you. They're going to pass out the framework. And as you get into this framework, you'll see some things in there on transition, and I could have done a lot better job with transition time, because I could have had all this handed out, but I didn't. So I'm going to wait till everybody gets that in their hands. Hey, Jenny. Do you know what time this is? Do you know what time this is concluding? I should know that since I'm
3.
Okay.
3.
Oh, we're good. Okay. I'm not handing out the rubric today intentionally, and I'm going to say that actually. So, thank you. Okay, thank you, principals. You should have a framework in your hands. I'm going to say this repeatedly. This is the instructional framework. This is not the teacher evaluation rubric. I will get to that in some later slides, but this is a framework for best practice instruction. It's only 2 pages, but we're going to get into it in a second and dig into it. There's a lot in this. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to understand collectively. Before I get into kind of digging into this and the substance in this, I just wanted to take you through so we're on the same page with regards to how this is broken up and how it's structured. So the first piece is there are 5 dimensions. Listed along the left-hand column, the vertical language that you see there is each one of the dimensions. Purpose, student engagement on the first page. If you flip it over to the other side, curriculum and pedagogy, assessment for student learning, and then the last one, classroom environment and culture. Again, for language sake, for consistency, those are the 5 dimensions of the framework. There are then 13 subdimensions that you'll see, for instance, in purpose. You'll see standards and then the learning target piece. Those are considered subdimensions. So how do you further break down that dimension into some subdimensions? Each one of them have different subdimensions, 13 in all. There are then vision statements. The best way I can describe the vision statements are, this starts to describe behaviors around that particular practice. So what does that look like in the classroom? It starts to lay that out in those vision statements for that particular dimension. The guiding questions, you will see, I do think this process and this framework does an exceptional job of not only just speaking to a process of inquiry, but actually having support around that. So the guiding questions is intended to support that. Support, how do we start to ask some questions around this work? And it also encourages individual reflection. So I can use this for some self-inquiry, or we can use this peer-to-peer, or most certainly principal to teacher. But not I'm going to tell you what to do, some questions in terms of how do we improve practice? Or how do we just get clarification around practice? So that's the intent, that's how the framework is broken down. I'm going to ask right now, this is when I got to get some of you off the comfy couch. So sorry. But I'm looking for tables of 5. If we're not, hold on real quick. If we're not, we'll do the best we can. If we get more than like 6 or, if we get up to 7 or 8, we're kind of losing some of the purpose of what we're trying to do. So in a second, I'll explain the directions, and then I'll ask you to try to find a group of 5. If it goes to 6, that's okay. Hold on real quick. So what I'm going to ask you to do, because this is going to kind of be the substance of some of the work, that we're going to, again, continue the learning as we leave here, but this will not stop, but this is going to allow us to get into the rubric a little, or excuse me, get into the framework a little bit. So if you could number off by 5s, if you have more than 5, just start the numbering again. There might be 2 people that are doing 1, but we don't want to go a whole lot further than that. Individually, I'm going to set the timer. Take about 5 minutes to look at your assigned dimension. If you're a 1, your purpose, and so on and so forth. Hold on real quick. So I'll set the timer. Individually, that should just be a time for you to underline. I know that's pretty color. It looks good. Mark it up. Okay? Underline keywords and phrases that speak to you with regards to your professional practice. I will then let you know when that 5 minutes is done. I'd like you to present your kind of key things that you underline, in addition to a question that could prompt some thinking at the table around your particular dimension. And then the last thing is, and again real quick, and I'll turn you loose, you're going to see some pretty intentional spiraling in this framework, meaning the connection between purpose and student engagement, you're going to see things that spiral. That's intentional. So the last piece of this activity would be, what are some of those commonalities that you saw between the 5? Make sense? So if you could move, number, and then I'll start the timer for that first section of this. Okay, guys, if I could have you come back. I've heard some things around the room. I appreciate you engaging in this. Just to give you a point of perspective, when we did the training on this, we spent at least a half day unpacking each one of these dimensions. So I get that, like, there's really good conversation going on, and I appreciate you engaging in that. And so clearly 60 minutes is tough, but what I'm promising you is, as we continue, as you get back to your buildings, there will be concerted effort taken to unpack these on a very in-depth scale. So we will do that. This was to give you a flavor of the framework and to kind of understand some of the commonalities. If this didn't come out, these are just some things that I highlighted that were kind of common things that were threads throughout the, and you might have come up with others, but the equity piece, each and every student, is certainly a common theme in those. What's the student's role, and how much, when we use the word agency and ownership, how much do they have, how much can they invest in the learning process on an individual basis? That student independence I heard throughout this conversation going on, that there's a lot engaged with regards to student independence. And then the rigor, so the instruction, the curriculum, the learning targets, all those things with regards to making sure that rigor is up there. Okay, so I'm going to move on, just use the last few minutes today to make a transition from the framework that's in front of you, that's a district instructional framework, to the connection to the teacher evaluation rubric that is also a 5D rubric. I again will say that you're going to leave here with questions. You can either jot those down or make sure that you get those back to your principal, but I certainly, the parking lot, that's just from, there's questions to answer. So there will be some of those. But I'm trying to make an explicit connection between the rubric and the framework. A good way to look at the rubric, the other thing is I'm intentionally not handing that out because I don't want us, and I'm just going to be real with you. No, there's nothing hidden. It doesn't do us any good that here it is and then we just start unpacking it on our own. So I'm going to share with you the framework. The principals will dig into that, promise you, with the 3 dimensions that we're going to focus on, which I'll come back to as far as why we're going to focus on 3. But look at the rubric as the success criteria that I shared in the beginning with regards to the agenda. What does it look like in the classroom? And what do the different levels look like? So that's the intent of this rubric. Other things to highlight here. I think it's accessible and actionable, so meaning you deserve a clear target, not a guessing game, not a checklist, but a clear target in terms of what those things are. And then the other things I've touched on. So as far as what it looks like, here is just one. This is the classroom environment and culture dimension of the rubric that obviously aligns with the back page, the last dimension that you see on page 2 of the framework. Okay, so just to kind of take you through the structure of this, we're going to throw a few more acronyms at you that we're going to have to become familiar with in the district. So you will see the framework that has the dimension listed on top. Again, this is the rubric. There's a subdimension underneath that. So for instance, classroom environment and culture, CEC1, use of physical environment. There's also an indicator that's listed after that, arrangement of the classroom, for example. We could get into all that with the arrangement of how I set this up, couches and tables. CEC is the acronym, obviously, classroom environment and culture, is just, for instance, SE is going to be student engagement. So that will be how these are listed as you go down on each one of the, on each one of the subdimensions. Oops. As it goes down, CEC1, CEC2, and so on and so forth. There is then a performance level for each one of those subdimensions. Okay, so in that, the description is unsatisfactory to distinguished. I'll let you judge for yourself when you get into this, but I do think it does a very good job being very explicit about what that looks like from the basic level to what it looks like to the proficient to what it looks like from the distinguished. Based on kind of our past checklists, this is certainly much more explicit and descriptive in my mind. But again, you'll dig into that at the building level and have a little more time around that. But just wanted for you to know the structure of those things. I already mentioned how it's progressive. The last thing I wanted to mention, last 2 things, is that this is a commitment to an inquiry process. Inquiry meaning it's reciprocal, it's back and forth, it's question and answer around best practice. So some of there's changes, but there's some really clear changes I just want to bring to everybody's attention that you're going to start to see take hold right away. For instance, in the past we had SMART goals. SMART goals are moving aside for this process, okay? And this process being a process around self-assessment. I want you to feel like this is our commitment to you to say, you know what? Like I'm a professional. I can reflect on what I'm doing really well and what I think I need to do a better job on. So that self-assessment is a pretty intentional and pretty in-depth process to say, I'm going to line up my thoughts around the framework. What do I think I'm doing well? What do I think I need to improve on? And then that will kick out some areas of focus. Okay? We're going to structure the self-assessment around 3 dimensions this year because we're going to be intentional about how we roll this out. This 2-page document is huge. I mean, there's a lot in there. So our commitment to you is that we're going to focus on 3 dimensions this year. Student engagement, start in the beginning. Purpose, student engagement, classroom environment and culture. will be the 3 that we focus on as a district. It doesn't mean that you're like not assessing kids this year. Like when you look at the other one, like we get that. So other things are going to be going on in the other 2 dimensions, but for us as a district to understand this and to unpack it as a team, we didn't think it would be a good rollout, and it wouldn't go well for us to say, yeah, we're going to bite this all off at once. So you're going to see that right from the get-go when you do the self-assessment. That's going to be focused around those 3 dimensions. And the work that the principals are going to do and the leadership teams back in the buildings are going to be around those 3 dimensions and unpacking those 3. Does that make sense? Okay. What else do I want to mention about kind of key changes? That's it for right now. You will hear, as far as the next steps go, the principals and the building leadership teams, which I'm kind of calling the teachers who have gone to this training who can be of assistance and provide a pretty good lens on some things that you are going to have questions on. They're there as a resource. They will provide more details about this evaluation process and any changes. So we'll have a document that is prepared and ready to go to say, here's all the specifics that you're going to leave here and probably have questions about. But that you will have that in your hands in the next few weeks. You're going to start to begin to unpack those 3 dimensions, and we have a pretty intentional process about how to do that. And then the last thing, that you'd complete that self-assessment by the October time period. Again, principals will walk you through how we're going to do that. So that's kind of try to be clear about some next steps. That was a quick summary of 60 minutes. I really appreciate your attention. I know it's the last session. Thank you. Have a great long weekend and have a great start to the year.